we can take a limited time on the front end and ask you some crowdsourced questions. Which would you prefer, front or
Now,
front end or
I'll
back?
make sure I give you plenty of time to ask your questions. Is that fair?
All
I'm a
right.
man of my word.
In that case, are we recording?
Yeah,
All right. Well,
Yeah, feel free.
Before we get
geez.
started here, we are here at the Oakland Press
Hi.
with Michigan Attorney General.
Is this
Bill-
live?
Yes, it is.
It is. Whoa.
Michigan Attorney General Bill Schuette, former congressman, former state lawmaker, and former judge. So,
I think you got it right.
yes,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have the right order, but
That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
but if you have something you want to open with, go right ahead.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Charlie and Dave and Michelle and our audience out there. What I want to do right now is just come by and say hi. We do this regularly, where I get a chance to talk with and engage you and your readers on issues that are important to Michigan. So I've been looking forward to this, and thank you very, very much. You know, first, it's been 3.5 years since I raised my right hand and I took an oath to preserve and protect and to defend the Constitution to the best of my ability. And this has been it's a huge honor and a privilege for me to be the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the state of Michigan. And I work with a talented group of people that are committed to work for the citizens of Michigan 24/7, 365. Now, as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of Michigan, I have many responsibilities, from consumer protection to environmental protection to child safety initiatives, school safety initiatives. It's fair to say that I stand up for and speak up for many voices across the state of Michigan. And part of my job, and it's been very impactful to me, is that as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, the responsibility being a voice and an advocate for victims across the state of Michigan is very significant. And what really drives me on this is that there's a friend of mine named Lola Hubbard from the Charlotte area. And I told her that if I had the privilege to serve as Attorney General, I made her a promise that I would be a voice for victims and their families, victims of crime and their families across the state of Michigan. And that's what I'm doing. And so, as an example of that would be the DNA evidence boxes. If you're a victim of rape in southeastern Michigan, I'm your voice. And I think you know this story, where thousands upon thousands of DNA evidence boxes, some people call them rape kits, but they're 8.5 by 11, about 2-3 inches thick. And in those boxes, it contains evidence of a brutal crime of rape. But the other side of that story is they've been shelved in a warehouse, never examined, never analyzed, which means that women have been brutalized twice, victimized twice, once by a horrific attack. And then secondly, that the perpetrator, the culprit, the creep, has never been brought to justice. And, never captured, never sentenced, never behind bars. Some of these folks are still on the street, ready to strike again. Well, not anymore, not on my watch. And with the help of the legislature, and the governor, we took $4 million from a settlement fund where we try cases and we win, because we work hard on that, representing the citizens of Michigan. And so what we did was take those $4 million, worked with the legislature, and we appropriated that so we can examine these rape kits. And we're going to do that as promptly as we can, so we can find out matches on the National Rape Registry list. And so we're starting the process of healing for people who've been victims of rape, and start the process to putting people behind jail. So I'm a voice for victims of rape. Meningitis is a big issue. 22 citizens of our state died because they've been infected by bad medicine, tainted medicine by a Massachusetts compounding pharmacy. I think you know that story as well. And I've formed a grand jury to get evidence and justice for victims of meningitis, and working with federal authorities in Massachusetts on this. I've been to a meningitis recovery group, and no press, no fanfare, no hoopla, but just listen and meet with people. And, there's a friend of mine named Penny, and she and her husband went into this pain clinic because her husband had got a shot for his back and for his neck. But, he came out worse than he went in, and then he later died. And if you talk to family members who've lost their loved ones, or, a family member or a friend, or you may not, and you're getting recovery because of the infected medicine, I mean, that's brutal. And so I'm a voice for victims of meningitis and a voice for victims of human trafficking. Later this afternoon, I'm going to go to meet with Common Grounds, and that's a great group here in Oakland County. And I've been to Vista Maria and over in Grand Rapids, the Manasseh Project or Sacred Beginnings, all these groups that are working very hard to try to provide help for victims of human trafficking. And sadly, Michigan was there was a sting last summer, and Michigan was the second. The Detroit area was second only to the Bay Area in California, where of the arrests made in the sting operation by federal authorities across the country. And so the fact is, what I did is form a commission on human trafficking, and what we did there is a 63-page report. And as we're having this discussion here, the legislature has been working on measures to toughen penalties for these creeps, these Johns and these traffickers, so it's a felony instead of a misdemeanor. And we're enhancing forfeiture provisions so we can get at the assets of the loot for these thugs who traffic and barter in the sex trade market. As a husband, as a father, to think that somebody's daughter would, through fraud or force or coercion, and get captured in essence and kidnapped and enter this dark world of human trafficking turns your stomach. And so working hard on that issue. So I'm a voice for the victims of human trafficking. We can talk about a school safety initiative. The other thing I do is for Michigan is I'm a voice for the Constitution. And I'm standing up for the pensions of cops and firefighters in Detroit, people who worked hard in a tough city, whose retirement future is in jeopardy because of the financial calamity in Detroit. And so my job as Attorney General is to enforce the Constitution. And it's not like a salad bar where you can pick or choose. It's not discretionary decision making, Attorney General with respect to the Constitution. That's not what it's about. It's not optional. So I'm defending the pension clause. I'm defending the admissions clause, a big case in front of the United States Supreme Court we might want to talk about, which was a voice for the Constitution. It was a voice for the citizens of Michigan. And I'm enforcing, the Natural Resource Protection Act, where there's a clause that I made sure that the legislature didn't raid the Natural Resource Protection Act, because those funds are for parks and recreation. They're not for other projects, as worthy as they might be. So my job is to defend the Constitution. So I'm a voice for the Constitution. I'm a voice for victims. I think I'm a voice for Michigan, and I'm working hard on that. And I'm delighted to be here today. How's that? Are we fair?
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
All right. Okay. Great. Great.
Why don't we start?
So we're about 50-50. That ain't bad.
Yeah, that's not bad. We actually, I don't know if you follow Facebook or Twitter or whatever, but we asked people who follow us what they would ask you.
Oh, Joy mentioned that to me,
Yeah,
which is fun.
So we thought.
And I do follow it some. It's like anything. Some are for you, some are against you, but that's okay. I got big shoulders and all that. But don't worry.
Well, everybody's got their critics.
Well, you know what, and this is all about discussion, and I happen to think that on any issue we ought to have. I mean, look at the Supreme Court decision on the 22nd. If you read the decisions by Justice Kennedy and Breyer, it was talking about discourse, and we can have a civil discourse on lots of different issues, and I hope people are passionate. I also hope people are civil, and that's what should happen. But fire away.
All right, fire away. One of the questions comes from Lori KS. Obviously, people don't always use their full names.
That's all right.
But she has a question regarding emergency manager laws. She said the will of the people is not first. Emergency managers were voted down, but now we have them. Now he's wasting millions of much-needed money fighting gay marriage. So, your thoughts on gay marriage?
Oh,
I know.
first it was emergency manager as well. First, let me just talk about the emergency manager. And Kevin Orr is a very bright attorney, does a great job. And Detroit's bankrupt. We know that. And the fact is we need to build for Detroit's future. So Kevin Orr is working very hard on that. And with respect to Detroit, I'm defending the pensions of Detroit's cops and firefighters, some of whom had no Social Security. And so my job as Attorney General is to defend the pension clause that says pensions shall not be diminished or impaired. So I'm doing that. The marriage clause was voted upon by almost 60% of the people. That was put in the Constitution. I'm defending that as well. I'm defending the admissions clause, where we had a victory for the Constitution on April 22nd, because nearly 60% of the citizens of Michigan voted for this basic concept that it's wrong, fundamentally wrong, to treat people differently based on the color of your skin, or your race, or your gender, or your ethnicity. And I'm defending that. And there is a clause of environmental protection, for example, as I mentioned earlier, where it says, I made sure it's hands off. You can't rob the Natural Resource Trust Fund, because it's not a personal piggy bank of the legislature. It's for parks and recreation. So I'm defending the clauses. And on the marriage issue, this will finally be decided by the United States Supreme Court. And I think the sooner the better. I believe, it's my opinion, that the state of Utah has a case that is more advanced and is progressing earlier than ours. And I believe that'll be the case, that the United States Supreme Court will make a final decision. And the fact is, the sooner we clear this up, the better. But my job is to defend the Constitution, and that's what I'll do.
All right. Another question comes from Jason Nolan. Why did he choose not to pursue the election rigging scheme by Speaker Jace Bolger and Roy Schmidt? Was there an expectation of political payback for choosing not to prosecute?
No, that was done. The courts in Ingham County went through that, and there was a special prosecutor that a judge in Ingham County determined, Justice Aquilina, and that was done by the judicial branch, and that's what occurred there. Period.
Okay. Let's see. From it's like Jonah Angst. She asks, why hasn't more been done to help the victims of the NECC financially? They are suffering.
The question, the New England Compounding Center, and I really appreciate that question, and I talked about that a bit earlier, and so I'm happy to talk about it again. And the fact is that this was tainted medicine, where people would go into a health pain clinic with the expectation of getting relief from pain, but they came out in unfortunately too many instances where they came out worse than they came when they entered, and 22 people died. And that's why I formed a grand jury, and that's why there are civil lawsuits out there as well that are pending on civil cases, not through the Department of Attorney General, because that's individuals' own cases. And that's why we had a major announcement not long ago with the United States Attorney from the state of Massachusetts, because Boston is where the New England Compounding Center is located. So we're working in a cooperative fashion with state officials. We're going to get to the bottom of that. We're going to find truth and justice for victims. I've been to those meetings and met with people who have just suffered tragically on it. Plus, the legislature, Senator Hune, is working on additional state protections because of this issue on meningitis.
All right. One final question comes from Andrew Decker, and he wants to know, what are your thoughts on U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder saying that state attorney generals do not have to enforce laws?
You know, I think Eric, I say this in all due respect, that Attorney General Eric Holder he's flat wrong. As I mentioned earlier, that enforcing the Constitution is not an optional decision for any Attorney General. My job is to enforce and defend the Constitution. Let me put it to you this way. On January 1st of 2011, I took an oath of office that I would preserve and protect and defend the Constitution to the best of my ability, so help me God, and I am. And the fact is, I can't be like a weather vane and say, well, boy, this issue's too sensitive. this issue's too hot. I better not enforce the Constitution. Those aren't the rules of the road. That's not the oath I took. I didn't take half an oath, or a partial oath, or an optional oath, or a discretionary oath. And frankly, if that's our system, where one person can choose to defend the Constitution or not, that just, the wheels will fall off the constitutional bus, so to speak. So my job is to enforce and defend the Constitution. And here's also the importance of our system. If we want to change the Constitution, we can. And so if the citizens of Michigan were to change the Constitution, I'm duty-bound to enforce and defend whatever the Constitution might be. An example is the pension. These cops and firefighters, I've said, worked hard in a tough city. And when this first started, they didn't have Social Security. And so the letters and comments and the phone calls that I get from people saying, Bill, thanks for fighting for my pension, that's important. And I think that's a critical part of the job.
I'm going to follow that up with a question
Sure.
regarding medical marijuana. A year ago you were here and you were not in favor of medical marijuana, as I recall, at least not from the video that I took then. What are your thoughts on medical marijuana today?
Well, I think what will happen is that sometime there'll be probably a vote to legalize drugs. Now, I'm opposed to that. The last thing I think we need to do is put more drugs in the hands of young kids. That's my viewpoint.
Well, I mean, you had said that it's not up to you to pick and choose which parts of the Constitution you want to.
But remember on that issue, the question was whether you could have dispensaries on every corner. And what happened there? The courts made the final decision on that, not me. So the courts interpreted that provision because there were holes in that provision. It was silent as to the issue of dispensaries, and the courts made the final call on that.
Well, many people believe that that ballot proposal was poorly written to begin with.
That's true. I would agree with that.
Even if it wasn't, because it left the legislature to interpret basically the rules, and you have to go make the rules for how this is going to work. Mm-hmm. But the reality has been that it seems like most of the rules have been made through prosecutorial actions, which have cost people their fortunes, in some cases obviously their livelihood, and left them with felony convictions when they thought they were actually following the ballot proposal as it initially came out. Is that fair?
What finally happened is the courts made the final determination on that. And so it went back to the courts, and that's our system. And the fact is that unfortunately it was very poorly written, and it caused a lot of problems.
You also have your critics out there that would argue that we have a conservative-leaning judiciary, and yourself, conservative Republican Attorney General, who's actually using, to some degree, through narrow interpretation, perhaps subverting the will of the majority of the people who voted for the ballot proposal in 2008.
You see, I don't think so at all. I don't think that's valid. The fact is what's going on here is there were some problems with the drafting, as you yourself admit. The courts made the final determination on that. And again, if people want to have a more narrowly crafted, a better written proposal, that could be put before the voters. And as I say, at some point maybe there'll be a vote to legalize drugs. I happen to think that'd be very detrimental to young people, putting more drugs in the hands of kids. But that's my viewpoint. But we can have a civil debate about it.
Well, obviously, you probably keep track of the latest polls, maybe not. But I think the last one I saw said 70% of Michigan residents actually favor medical marijuana, but slightly less than half do not favor recreational marijuana. Mm-hmm. So do you really think that there will be that broad of a proposal coming forth?
You never know. I think there might be, people talk about having on the ballot in 14 or 15 or 16. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
Well, kind of along those lines too, that's obviously a controversial issue. The gay marriage thing is really a controversial issue.
There are lots of
yes.
There are a lot of controversial issues, and that's all right.
Right. So being in a position like yours, and knowing that there's an election coming up in November, do you get worried when some of these things come up? Like, do you worry if you're going to offend one side or the other by taking a stand? I mean, I know you have to, but is that kind of a tough position to be in?
Well, Dave, I don't worry about that. And the fact is, I've had incredible privilege to represent my state and my nation as a congressman, as a state senator. I made decisions as a judge on the Michigan Court of Appeals. that were controversial. I made decisions as a congressman, when I supported the Americans for Disability Act when I was a member of Congress, when I supported Martin Luther King holiday when I was a member of Congress. Those are controversial issues. I supported tax cuts when Ronald Reagan was president. So there are all sorts of tough foreign policy decisions when I was a congressman. Now I'm an attorney general, and the fact is I'm prepared for that, and I'm very transparent. You don't have to guess where I stand on issues. I'm very forthright about that. I'm direct. I try to listen to individuals as well. Try to be on receive as much as broadcast. I'm not perfect on it. I probably displayed that today. But but the point is that my job is to make decisions, and sometimes they're not easy. But I don't complain about it. This is a huge privilege that people place in me their trust. When you run for office, it's a job interview. It's an employment interview. I know very clearly that my bosses are the citizens of Michigan. I was straightforward where I stand about the importance of public safety. And in terms of more cops plus tough laws equals a safer Michigan. And that's why I'm so strongly supportive of prosecutors and sheriffs, and make sure our streets are safe and our schools are for learning and not a place of fear. And that's why I'm so strongly fighting to be a voice for victims across the state. And sometimes people will agree, sometimes they'll disagree, but I try to have those discussions in a civil fashion.
As a lawyer and a former judge, Republicans and Democrats, especially running for the judiciary, kind of hate the Republican/Democrat label. However, and they tend to, call themselves either rule of law judges or rule of empathy judges. The phrases.
Right.
There's
a lot of rhetoric out there.
What's your legal philosophy? How would you describe yourself in those terms?
Well, I am a conservative. When I was a judge, my job was to apply the law as written, and I was not a judge who felt that I was an extra legislative, another version of the legislature. If I didn't like the ruling, I couldn't make up a result, because it's the civics course here is that if you're a judge and you don't like the law, that's not your job. The job to pass the laws is the legislature. The governor signs it, and she or he, upon execution of signing the bill becomes law. And so if if a judge doesn't like a law, he ought to say, well, the legislature ought to change it, but you don't do it just to satisfy whatever viewpoint you might have. I didn't like every law I reviewed, but I also know that it wasn't my job to rewrite the law. So I'd apply the law as it is written, with a clear and firm understanding that my job as a member of the judicial branch then was to interpret the law as it was written. When I was a legislator, my job was to write the laws. As Attorney General, my job is to enforce the laws. So I understand the checks and balances and our separation of powers in state government.
What laws that are on the books today that you have to enforce that you don't like?
Well, I'm not going to get into all of those. Fair question, but
name two.
No, I'm not sure that's constructive right now. But the fact is that my job is to enforce the law and defend the Constitution, and I'm going to do that.
How about one?
I think I'm going to pass on that.
I got another one.
Fair question, though, Charlie. I get you A's for effort, pal.
Someone just tweeted about this in response to the meningitis thing, claiming that Michigan's drug immunity law, claiming that you co-authored it, has hurt Michigan patients. I know it might not apply in the meningitis.
No, it doesn't apply. It's just not accurate.
Right. But what about, are there other cases that may have harmed Michigan patients?
Again, they're far different, so it's much different.
Michelle? Any questions?
No, I'm too busy handling all of this. I don't
Okay,
know
no, you got a lot going on, Michelle.
All right. Just kind of a final question
Sure.
for me. As we started out talking, you've been in the state senate, you've been in Congress, you've been a judge, and now you're an attorney general. Which has been your favorite office?
Oh, that's a great question. It's if you kind of there, it all has been just a big honor. If you would have asked me, Charlie, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever, that I'd be attorney general, I would have said, well, thanks for the compliment, and changed the subject. I didn't anticipate this specific journey of service. It ended up that way. It's been a huge honor for me. My calling is service. It always has been. It always will be. And I view it as I work in the public house. I serve in the public square. And any structure, if you're, I've had a lot of different jobs in my life. I was the head potato boy at Ponderosa. I was a yard boy. I worked construction. I know how to build. I was kind of an apprentice mason, so to speak. So I've done different things than when you build a structure. Same thing with public service. I've been on the legal side as Attorney General, judicial side, executive side as Ag Director, legislative side as a Congressman and Senator. They're all different. And as Attorney General, every day is different. No one day is the same. There's always some other, on my legal smorgasbord here in this conference room, it's just, there's always a different item on the table that day. So every day I suit up as Attorney General. I'm excited about serving. And I'm going to continue to work hard as long as I have the privilege of serving as Attorney General.
As David mentioned earlier, this is an election year for you.
Yeah.
And I believe the nomination process is you're nominated at convention in August, correct?
That's right.
Do you anticipate any challenges at the convention this year?
I don't. I take nothing for granted. However, on any election, I work hard every day on it. I've got the will to win. I have the will to win, and that's an important element in any endeavor, whether it's selling newspapers, whether it's in politics, or you're in a manufacturing business. You have to have the will to win, and I do. I have a great team. I have a strong record that I'll put up against anybody. We have a strong organization, and I'm working hard on that. But I take nothing for granted. Michigan is a purple state. We're not all red and Republican like Oklahoma. We're not all, blue like New York or something like that. But I got to tell you, 2014 is going to be a great year for people who suit up and vote Republican. This has been the sixth year, the midterm of the 6 years of a failed presidency. The Obamacare fiasco, the exchanges, the expansion, government expansion, the failures in Obamacare. The taxes go up, the premiums increase. It endangers Medicare. It squeezes out private options in the healthcare market. Sebelius has resigned, and so I think there's going to be a big expression in opposition to Obamacare in 2014. We have a strong ticket. We have a strong Republican team. Governor Snyder and I and Ruth Johnson, your local girl here. I believe the State House and State Senate will stay Republican, and the rule of law justices that you mentioned will be reelected.
So you are a rule of law person then?
Well, I'm saying I was mentioning those rule of law justices will be reelected. As I told you, my job when I was a judge on the Court of Appeals, I applied the laws as written. I didn't make it up. Or get to the decision that I might have liked to, myself. But I'm saying in 2014 it's going to be a strong Republican year. I believe that I will be reelected, but I'm going to work hard to earn the support of people in Michigan every day.
Well, Obamacare is also the law of the land. Don't you have to enforce that as well?
Well, it's a federal law, and there are a lot of constitutional questions out there. And what I'm saying now, the features of Obamacare are triggering in. Now, mind you, the administrations try to postpone it or give exception upon exception. But the fact is, the taxes have increased. People have lost their health insurance policy. Remember those words? If you liked your health care plan, you can keep it. Well, that's not true. And we saw how the premiums have gone up. People have lost their health care policies. And it squeezes out options in the private market. So I think people will express themselves in 2014.
As I recall, Governor Snyder, a fellow Republican, incurred a little bit of Republican wrath when he advocated last summer going along with the expansion of Medicaid to meet the requirements under Obamacare. Obviously, the legislature put that off until this April to some degree, but was that a fair criticism of the governor?
Well, you know, there are always lots of issues out there, and the governor and I agree about 95% of the time, which is about the same percentage as the best man in my wedding. So I think that's pretty good. And the governor and I have a great relationship. We have a strong team, and we're not clones of each other. I don't think you'd like that. If we were, you'd be writing stories about that. And then the fact is, you know, we have, among the Republican Party, we can have healthy exchange and debate and ideas. I think that's all right. But thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Mr. Attorney General, thanks for stopping in to see us.
Great to be with you. Thank you, Charlie and Dave and Michelle.